but the winter's been great. We're still surviving COVID. We're still dealing with COVID. And I decided that why not get the guy who's in charge of Knoxville Hospital and Clinic. I almost said the guy that knows everything about this, but it's the doctors that do that. But,
thanks for not saying that.
Yeah. CEO, Kevin Kincaid, second time you've been on the show. First of all, thanks for taking time again.
Sure.
I really appreciate you doing this. I want to touch on this on a local level, and I'm just, well, you and I have had on and off air conversations before about things, and I'm totally amazed about where we are now to where we were then, because I think if it wasn't the last show, it's pretty close to the last show we did in season 1. We really just got on the front porch of walking into COVID. We really didn't know what we were dealing with. We really didn't know how long it was going to last. We still don't on the length, obviously. We didn't know mask protocol back then. They were talking social distancing, I believe, was the first conversation. And the leaps and bounds and the things that have happened since then. And now we have a vaccine to talk about, which is, I think, really cool. I know there's a lot of skepticism out there on social media. I want to put it all out there right now. Let's cover this as far as where we are now to where we were 9 months ago.
Yeah, I think what's some people overlook is the human achievement of this.
Yeah,
this is the modern moonshot that we were able to develop not only one vaccine but more than one and more coming, basically inside the 12-month window of when we first found the virus in our country. So that's just an amazing achievement. So the downside of that is it does give some social media fodder to it's too new, they don't know, it was rushed, all of those myths that we're dealing with on a daily basis, both locally and across our country. These are safe vaccines, and they were developed under the same protocols that we do with any other type of vaccine. That I know when you and I talked earlier, the vaccine is the ticket. And I think other people, may have some different ideas about that. But I think if you talk to, most infectious disease docs, public health officials, your family practice doc, they're going to tell you the vaccine is the ticket. How did we get rid of smallpox? How did we get rid of not worrying about tetanus every day?
Polio.
Mumps and polio, all those things that we just don't worry about anymore. It was a vaccine. And so this is the same thing. These are new vaccines. They're just incredibly well developed. The science behind them is just incredible. I always kind of joke, but it's really true, is the people that did this are the ones that you and I were cheating off of in high school. They're the ones that all the smart kids are day and night been working on this to give us the golden ticket out of this problem and get us out of this pandemic, and the vaccine is the way to go.
You mentioned day and night, and we see national media all the time talking to doctors, talking to everyone. But on a local level, I think even before we had our first conversation about this, even I took for granted, our local docs are just kind of operation status quo. But yeah, they're doing their job on a daily basis that they're supposed to do. But then they go home at night or take a break and still stay at work or whatever, and they're researching and studying what is in front of them as far as the documentation, the papers.
I just couldn't say enough about our medical staff and what they've done over the last 12 months as it relates to the pandemic and the expertise that they bring at the local level. They, like you said, when they go home at night, while I'm maybe doing something else, so playing with my hobbies, they're reading medical journals. They're digging into information, and so that every day when I come into work, I can talk, hey, anything new? No, we don't really have anything new today. Or today we've got 3 or 4 things. We want to look into this a little bit further. So I always say, we've got, amazing institutions of health across the country. And our docs right here at Knoxville Hospital and Clinics, they're plugged into that on a regular basis. The docs at the Cleveland Clinic or at the Mayo or any place that you want to use, our docs know what they know. Right. They're reading the same journals, and we're giving the same information to our patients that they would be given to patients in Cleveland or Minneapolis. So it's an incredible effort on their part, and I I couldn't thank them enough. But really, it's what they do. They were definitely in that smart kid club, and
Yeah.
so since they were little, very driven, and that hasn't stopped. And so we're all benefactors of that, and so I appreciate that a lot.
One thing I want to bring up also, again, from the 9 months ago to where we didn't know what was going on, is you guys literally, I don't want to say shut down. You stayed open, but you went into what I would consider more of a military compound. You had barricades. You had things shut off. You had a procedure where people would come into you, and it looked pretty radical from the highway to begin with.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and it seemed radical.
Yeah.
And this is where, again, your medical staff and administrations, because I'm wired
Mm-hmm.
for an open facility, for people to come in and be a welcoming place to come, like the service part of what we do. That's kind of how I'm wired. Well, I needed docs to help me kind of balance that with the number one priority that we had still today, but it was with all the unknowns in the beginning,
Right.
was we had to keep that building safe, because we can't take care of the community if it was perceived as a building that had been infiltrated with the virus and it's not a safe place to go. So we, at first, what seemed to me to be quite extreme, we really did set it up like I remember entering military institutions and
Right.
installations, having these checkpoints where you had to stop and you had to go through certain protocols to get in the building. But in hindsight, it was extremely reasonable with all the unknowns.
Oh, yeah.
So we did a great job of protecting our building. So we remained a safe place for people to come, regardless of what their conditions were throughout the pandemic. We protected our staff. Very proud of those numbers that we've had with protecting our staff and having a minimum amount out that had contracted COVID-19. That didn't happen by accident. They're working really hard to protect themselves, because if I don't have any nurses, I don't have any docs, I don't have any lab techs and technologists, we can't take care of people.
Right.
So they took care of themselves. They took care of the building. They paid attention to what they were doing in their private time, because as it relates to a pandemic, you don't just get to come in and do your work and pretend that what you do outside of work can't be brought into work. So all of a sudden, people are really beginning to pay attention to how they spend their private time, what they're doing, who they're with, what size is the group. And all the staff really stepped up, and it helped us to maintain to be a safe place to be seen throughout the pandemic.
I'm going to use that for an example, because I did forget and neglect, and I shouldn't have. We are broadcasting live from the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum for a couple of reasons. The main reason is you and I have 6 feet in between us on this big, long table, where last year when we first did this, we knew the social distancing was a situation getting ready to come, but we were in a cubicle the first time we did this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've adapted.
Yeah.
When I first heard about this, I'm like, oh, come on now, 6 feet. What's 6 feet to 2 feet? But as you, again, read up on it, as you see the studies, and I'll be the first one to admit, I got COVID. I got COVID just before Labor Day weekend. And first of all, I hate being locked up. But when you're sick and locked up and you can get, and absolutely go nowhere, that's even worse. The other thing about it is, I was fortunate. I did not get it that bad. But at the same time, a really close friend of mine was in ER and struggling to breathe. So much so that they had the pads ready to zap him because his pulse ox was dropping. So it affects everybody differently. I think that's the misconception on Facebook, on Twitter, that we need to talk about later on. But I want to talk about the progress that Knoxville hospitals came forward, because this show is Try Knoxville. This is giving people a reason to come to here. And our hospital, number one in the book, because you guys transitioned from that military-looking compound and brought it back to where you could manage it. But you also had to start dealing with COVID patients because, again, in Iowa, statewide, we really didn't know what we were dealing with. Everything went to what I call the cardiac and trauma 1 hospitals, the major hospitals that deal with COVID. They got overwhelmed.
Yeah. So we did a lot of things that ended up being very beneficial to us in the community in the beginning, which just really weren't sure, but we just kind of took a conservative approach and kind of thought about things from well, what's a worst case scenario? And then we've learned along the way kind of how to live with the virus. We knew that kind of checkpoint, stopping every car out, on the outside of our campus. We had to figure out a way to check people safely within the building as weather changed and all of that. And so we've learned to adapt. But for instance, we built early on, we put together a makeshift COVID wing, and we put in some equipment to make those rooms negative pressure, that had the appropriate amount of air exchanges to keep it safe for our staff to take care of those patients, and set up that wing and basically sealed it off from the rest of the hospital before we even had a patient in Marion County. I mean, I had no idea is all this just wasted effort? We're not going to need it. But when the virus did show up, we had it, we were ready, and we've used it nearly every day since. So we've just learned to adapt to the changing dynamics. And so that's just been something that our staff has been doing on a daily basis.
You and I had a conversation last month about this. I'm totally amazed at the fact, because we've heard about this nationwide, PPE being a struggle of keeping enough on hand, whether or not to get the freezers for the Pfizer vaccination, if they're even available out there. And again, our little small town community hospital, Knoxville Hospital's got it set up now.
Yeah, so, we, one of the things that you have a lot of things that started kind of coming at you as it related to the pandemic, and rules were changing, the financial dynamics were changing on a daily basis, but we kind of kept our focus on what is the most important thing, and that was keep the building safe, keep our staff safe. I cannot keep staff safe without appropriate amount of PPE.
Right.
So we basically took some of our best people that know the most about online shopping.
There you go.
And if you raised your hand and said, I'm a good online shopper, we set you up with a bank of computers, and you found me gloves, you found me surgical gowns, and we sourced them from all over. And we worked really hard to keep a good supply coming so we could protect our staff, to take care of our community. And so, and to date, we haven't had any shortages where we ran out of anything. And so, and we maintain a good supply. So, boy, we just got creative and started to kind of put the pieces together and make sure we had that here. And the same thing with the freezer that you just referenced. I mean, these are expensive freezers.
Yeah.
And, that go down to these ultra low temperatures. And so, the finance side of me was like, well, I'll buy that freezer if I know I'm going to get the Pfizer vaccine.
Right.
And then, working with our medical staff and our clinical staff, a good administrator will always defer to those folks when, if you don't know, listen to your docs, listen to your nurses, listen to your clinical leadership team. And their point, which was a great one, we don't know which vaccine we're going to get.
Right.
So let's be ready. Let's not wait to try to get a freezer when everybody else is trying to get a freezer. So we ordered it early. We have it on site, ready to go for the Pfizer vaccine, and we haven't had a single vial of Pfizer vaccine yet. But if we were to get it, we can keep it.
We'll get more into the vaccines here in a little bit, but again, the process of dealing with the last 9 months. The first time we had you on the show, we talked about you growing up in Knoxville.
Mm-hmm.
Your next step was going in the military, you and Brian Clark. How much of this lifetime in the military, obviously you're not going to be a drill instructor by no means to your staff, but you're dealing with situations where things have to be A, B, C, D, and E, and you do rely on your docs, you do rely on your staff, and that's the manager side of you. But did the military prepare you for this too, as far as the setup was concerned?
Well, I'm sure the military had a huge influence on the way I think, because in those early days with a lot of the unknowns, I just went into the mode of what's the most important thing that's got to happen today. And it always referenced back to I got to have the people and the supplies and the equipment to keep the building safe and keep our community safe, and everything else was secondary to that. Didn't fall into the distractions of everything else. Certainly the financial strains that really hit hard in those first few months
Sure.
are lingering in my mind. But because we took care of those things and we took a proactive approach, we were able to get through that both financially and clinically to continue to take care of our community, and it didn't damage us long term. Because if you didn't make those decisions, you could create a hole that you'd be trying to dig out of for years to come, and it could damage your organization for years and years. And so the support I received from our board was just incredible. Those folks basically said, "What do you need?"
Right.
And what kind of support do you need? And so we just took care of things early. We tried to be extremely proactive, and we rode that initial wave pretty well. Pretty proud of the team.
This is the second time, not this interview, but second time that we've spoke on Try Knoxville, where you've brought up the board and how good they are to work with. You've been around, you've bounced around other hospitals, and without throwing anybody underneath the bus specifically, boards are important. I mean, I'm sure in your career, you've ran across one or two people on a board that just makes life a nightmare. And our board, I know most of them, and I got to say, you've got a pretty good crack staff out there as far as the board's concerned, too.
I would stack our medical staff and our board of directors up against any organization that I'm aware of, any. And everybody is working together in an effective manner. That doesn't mean that we don't have our challenges and disagreements, but how we handle those is what makes all the difference in the world. Our board holds me accountable, and they're not afraid to ask me tough questions as to why are we going this way instead of that way. They keep the pressure on. That's their job, and they're not afraid to do it. But they do it in a way that I feel 100% supported all the time. Our medical staff knows, I think you could pull any of them in here, I've got their back. I trust them. I trust them with my own life and my family's life.
Right.
And that is reciprocated back to me. They give me the benefit of the doubt when I need it, because there's been a lot of things that we were operating under, I just don't know, best guess. And that's not really a great way to operate a very complex organization. But we had to do that in these early days, and we just all pulled together and did a great job.
We're going to continue talking COVID here for a few more minutes, and we're going to change gears into the hospital itself and the future of it. We're up to vaccination time now.
Sure.
You mentioned you've got capability of doing the Moderna, I believe it's pronounced.
Moderna.
You've done that already in-house. You're ready for Pfizer if it shows up with the freezer. We've talked about this between ourselves. I want to talk about it on air right now. How do we convince the people, even though they're watching right now on Facebook Live, how do we convince the people in social media that they should do exactly what they would do if they had a lump, if they had a chest pain call, if they had any type of other medical issue, they'd go to their doctor and they'd follow their doctor's advice or get their doctor's guidance. Right now, it seems to me that they're paying more attention to social media than they are to their own docs.
Yeah, and it's no, I can appreciate and understand that this stuff has come during a very trying time where people are generally skeptical and a little untrusting of whether that be the government or kind of the processes of how things are developed. I mean, I totally understand that.
Yeah, it's the unknown still.
Yeah, and it's new. So I can appreciate that. But I get every day, I'll get, an old acquaintance. I'll get a text. I'll get an email. My old Sunday school teacher sent me an email about, Kevin, you'll be honest with me. Should I get this vaccine?
Sure.
And, my answer is 100% yes, don't think twice about it, get it. But here's the thing. Do not listen to me. Talk to your doctor.
Right.
Ask your doctor. 100% of our physicians, soon as it was available to them, they rolled up their sleeves. And these are the people that know.
Right.
They are not going to put things in their body that would damage them. They would not do that.
Right.
And they're the ones that know. And so if you are looking for a reason to not get the vaccine, I promise you, you will find lots and lots of references and things that look pretty compelling and look legit, telling you why maybe you shouldn't get this vaccine, and it's government going to track you, and it's if you're believe in right to life, you shouldn't get all those things.
Right.
If that's what you're looking for, you can find it, an excuse to not get it. But I'll just go back to ask your doctor. You trust your doctor with your life for everything else. Why would you change now?
Yeah.
This is how we eradicated the worst diseases that humanity has ever faced. And this certainly COVID-19 doesn't fall into that category. But this is our ticket out of that. And so I just keep telling people that go to the people who know. And who really knows? It's not me.
Right.
I'm 100% the minute that I was able to get a shot, I'm rolling up my sleeve. I'm not going to jump in line, but when it's my turn, I'm going to get it.
Right.
So that is something that I just hope that people can really begin to take to heart is talk to the people who know, and that is your doctor.
One thing, and I'll be the first one to confess, when COVID showed up, I downplayed it. It's another virus. It's another type of flu. We all seen it. We all talked about it. Don't touch your face. I keep on doing that. You ever notice ever since they said don't touch your face, everything on your face is it's crazy. My point is on this whole thing is if I'm having chest pain and I go to the doc and they send me to Des Moines and they say, hey, we got to do open heart surgery, I'm not going to say, hang on a second. I'm going to check out social media and see what they think. Let's get my friend's opinion on this. All right. I'm getting a shot. I'm going to be eligible for a shot because I still work for the school. I'm going to get it. I'm thoroughly impressed by how fast it got here and all the teams of scientists and doctors that spent doing this. And if you want to make it political right now, I'll make it political. The politicians got the shots. They're not going to do anything to kill themselves. So, that's my best advice. But again, don't listen to me. Listen to Kevin and what he's saying by saying listen to the docs because they are the ones that know what's going on.
Yeah.
And I can truly appreciate that. Let's change gears a little bit. I'm tired of talking COVID already today.
Yeah.
Knoxville Hospital, you mentioned the financial strain at the beginning of this thing. Not so much, and if I'm wrong, tell me, maybe not so much because of the COVID itself, but because of the fact that you guys had to shut down a lot of your operations that bring in your finances, your money, your elective surgeries were shut down for a while.
Yeah, so, a lot of people think that all hospital services pay the same, and that is just not the case.
Right.
So if we were running the Knoxville Hospital as a for-profit business and you were one of my shareholders and we were only worried about profits, the first thing you would tell me to do is shut down the emergency room.
Right.
That's not a profit center. So that would be an example of places that hospitals do that out of mission. It's required. And how can you have a hospital without an emergency room?
Exactly.
It's what the core of a hospital is. And so the only services that were available for us when we kind of went into those shutdowns was all the service lines that don't pay well.
Mm-hmm.
All the ones that we count on for revenue to support ERs and inpatient activity. Those were shut down, and the only ones that we had available were the ones that we typically lose money providing those services. And in some parts of the country, I remember sitting there watching the daily press conferences with Governor Cuomo in New York, talking about New York City being overwhelmed.
Right.
And we had no patients. I mean, the halls were literally empty in the hospital. So, obviously that changed as the summer progressed. It was one of the times that I really felt that, a lot of people fall into the trap of, the government officials only have, ill intent, and they're selfish, and they're only worried about the people that, got them elected, and all those things that kind of go through people's minds.
Right.
But in those early days, the hospital community came to our elected, officials, both on a state level and more importantly on the national level, and so you got to get something done, or hospitals are going to begin to close from we won't be able to pay the doctors,
Right.
and there's no revenue, and hospital business is tough anyway before COVID, so there's not like hospitals across the country had huge nest eggs that they could live off of. Those have been whittled away over the years, dramatically. So hospitals were counting on those service lines that provide revenue, and when those shut down, we were in trouble
Right.
as a hospital community. And so the federal government stepped up and got us relief under various mechanisms to help us bridge that financial gap so we could get our employees back. So then as things began to ease up and we were able to get back into those service lines, we were basically restarting a new business because it had been shut down for a while. So now we had to restart. And so there's like new startup costs and all those things that you have kind of going on. And so we came through that really well.
Wasn't as bad as your first week, though. I remember our first interview, and the first week you said you were like dollars and cents away from being closed.
Oh, yeah.
So you had a plan together. One of the things you guys have going on right now is an expansion, a remodel, whatever we want to call it.
Yeah.
You guys are moving forward again. I guess I'm going to ask you, with being shut down, I know you got some of the federal assistance, but again, you guys rely heavily on local donations. You do fundraisers, you do golf outings. That didn't happen last summer because we didn't know where we were on golfing. Turns out golfing was fine, so I hope it happens this year.
Yeah.
I finished last place 2 years ago. I plan on doing that again this year.
Yeah.
Again, you have, I lost the name of it over at the Armory all of a sudden.
Yeah, our annual gala.
Gala, yeah. I had a blast in that 2 years ago.
Yep.
Wasn't able to do that. But yet you guys still did a fundraiser that worked out, I think, pretty decent for you.
Oh, yeah. It was one of, if not our best year ever,
Yeah.
it was one of the top. And people in our community are incredibly gracious and generous and have been very, very supportive of the hospital. And so obviously most of our revenue comes from taking care of patients and providing billable services. But when we do these fundraisers, and I also like to call them friend raisers as well,
Sure.
having people connected to the hospital and vested in the hospital, we're not a county facility.
Right.
So none of your tax dollars come to the hospital. And so when we create this and somebody takes some of their precious resources and writes us a check to support us, we have somebody vested in our organization. They care about what we're doing with that money. They care about what we're doing with the future, what decisions we're making. And so that makes us stronger as an organization. And so this year was just a banner year, even without those events. We're really looking forward to doing them down the road because, again, getting together is just so crucial. So we had to forego that this year and do things more virtually, online. But people just continued to step up, and they stepped up in a big way. We are really specifically focusing this year on our ER project. We have a couple of things that we want to do in the emergency room. We did some improvements in the original construction project that we did a few years ago. We took care of our what I would call and refer to as our trauma bays. So we have kind of a great setting for that and plenty of room for it. Where we come up short is in our private treatment spaces. So what ends up happening is if we run out of private treatment spaces, then if you're there for a non-trauma reason in our emergency room, and you're in a trauma bays are not built for privacy.
No, not at all.
And so we want to have more private treatment spaces. And built on that is we're having continued pressures. Every hospital in the state is not unique to Knoxville. Every hospital in the state is struggling on how to deal with long holds of mental health patients.
Right.
There's just not enough beds for the folks that are really in some sort of mental health crisis. So what we've done is we've taken a traditional ER exam room, and we have a mental health patient in there, and then we have to quickly figure out how to make that room safe for whatever condition that they're facing, not only for themselves but for our staff.
Sure.
And so that's the first thing. And so we do that. But when you look at it, these people are not being held for hours. A lot of us, myself, I have an active family and I go to an emergency room. We get a little irritated if we have to wait, a little longer than what we thought.
Sure.
So usually that's minutes or maybe a few hours. These mental health patients are there for days.
Yeah.
And days and sometimes weeks. Now imagine being in an 80, 90 square foot exam room, no windows, and being held in that space.
I got to be honest with you. If I wasn't mental going in, being in there that long would drive me. Because I'm that guy. I'm the one that says, okay, I've been here for an hour, and yeah, my arm's almost fallen off from a motorcycle wreck, but I want to go home.
Right.
And I couldn't imagine. And I've seen it firsthand on both sides of the realm where, how do you want to say this? Knoxville Hospital is a first line or a second line for mental health, but it's not the final line. You guys are looking to place them in something that's more geared towards dealing with their particular situation at the time.
Yeah. So mental health, and this is, I'll get on my soapbox about this a little bit because I'm pretty passionate about it. But hospitals, and particularly emergency rooms in community hospitals, we are basically the only place that cannot say no.
Right.
We are the place when everybody else says, we're not going to accept that patient, that person, we're not going to accept them. They're too disruptive, they're dangerous, they're all these things. Community hospital emergency rooms is where they end up. And the way I try to explain that to people is, so what happens is we're not a mental health facility. We don't have all the mental health treatments. We don't have the staff for that, but they're left with us.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to find a place for them that's more appropriate. Imagine if you come in with a heart attack or you have a cancer diagnosis and you're left with us and we're like, well, we don't treat that, but I guess you're going to have to stay with us and we'll do the best we can. That would be completely unacceptable.
Right.
That would
exactly.
be unacceptable. It would be unethical. It just wouldn't happen.
Yeah, the analogy is great. I smile about that analogy because that's a perfect analogy.
Yeah, but somehow we've said that that's okay for mental health,
Right.
and it just is not okay. And so on the state level, we've been heavily involved. I spend a lot of my time on different task force and work groups trying to figure out how to create less demand for mental health services. So that's kind of your outpatient counseling, make sure people have the right outlets so that they don't have that mental health crisis at 2 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other side of that, we know for a fact people will have mental health crises in the middle of the night.
Right.
And they need a place to go immediately to start receiving appropriate care, just like you would if you had a heart attack. And until we get there, we're not going to rest.
Right.
So part of our construction is going to be, we know that's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a long time. These are services, and these are a lot of times people that are on the marginal sides of society. People don't want to pay for it via more taxes or other expenditures. I would argue you are in some form, you just can't see it. If you look at the number of people with mental health diseases that are in our prisons and in our jails, that's an expense that
Right.
we're all absorbing. So I think there's a better way to do it. But at the end of the day, we're going to have more inpatient capacity in the state to be able to take care of people appropriately. So we know that's not going to happen overnight. So we are going to be building a space that is better to hold these people for long periods of time. Something as simple as if you're going to be with us for days, I'm pretty sure you're going to need to use the restroom.
Right.
You'd probably like to take a shower. So when we go into our more public places for that, that's not set up for mental health patients. It's not safe for them. It's not safe for us. So we want to make sure that we have those facilities right there that we're able to better take care of them because it's the right thing to do. We're not going to be paid for that. And
Yeah, like I say, I see the finances going,
yeah, the finance side of me said, don't do that.
Right.
But that's not what rules the day.
Right.
What rules the day is we have a mission to take care of our community, and there are people in our community that are suffering from mental health diseases and crises, and we want to keep them out of that. We want to keep them healthy, but we know it's going to happen. Just like I don't want anybody to have a car accident this afternoon. I think we're supposed to get some snow this weekend. I pray that nobody gets hurt, but somebody will end up in our emergency room in a car accident when the roads get slick. Guaranteed, 100% it's going to happen.
Yep.
So I know that. So I have to be ready for that.
Yep.
So I have CT scanners. I have x-ray machines. I've got the best docs I can find. So we take care of people. So you got to have that same mentality, I think, with mental health patients.
I agree 100%. And you mentioned in our community, but it's not just community. It's statewide. It's in our country.
Yeah.
It's a situation that needs to be taken care of. I appreciate you and the committees and boards you serve on to make this happen. Again, it's not going to happen overnight, but it takes people like you to do this.
Appreciate it.
With that being said, knowing you most of my life, from younger days to older days, and knowing your family and your wife, you're the crazy one at home right now too, though, because your hobbies are still crazy.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears a little bit. Still riding bikes.
Still riding
dirt bikes.
motorcycles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Son in on that kind of stuff too, or
Oh yeah. No, he. It was kind of interesting. He was not quite as reckless. I'll use that term as I was as a little kid. He would. We would go out and want to work on jumps, and he'd be like, "Nah, I'm not. That's too big a jump. Not doing it." When I was a kid, I'd just do it and crash. And he was very cautious. But what I noticed was every time we went, he kept getting faster and faster. And then I kind of noticed, man, I'm gonna have to ride to keep, stay ahead of him.
Yeah.
And in the last couple of years, he's in a class ahead of me. I can't even begin to keep up with him. I'd kill myself trying to keep up with him. But he's just he has a personality that just keeps getting better on a real consistent basis, and I just didn't have the patience for that. So he'll far exceed anything I did, and the same with his wrestling. I mean, he just every year he just keeps getting better and better and stronger and more competitive, and just that's how he does things, and so that's been awesome.
Everybody else in the family doing good too?
They're doing good. My daughter's doing well. My wife's doing well. Our family's doing great. We've been touched by COVID in our own family, like most everybody else that's watching and or listening to this, and we've been blessed to not have anybody in the hospital. They got through it. Some had a little worse than others, but we've just been kind of blessed as a family, and yeah, those blessings continue.
I'm going to end it with that and this simple note. Again, I had it back around Labor Day. Good friend of mine's had it. I've lost people to it. My daughter tested positive yesterday. Now, because I came in contact a few weeks ago, I didn't have it, but I came in contact a few weeks ago with somebody else. I was more or less quarantined again. Haven't seen my grandkids since Christmas, right before it, for brief minutes. Now I got to wait 2 more weeks. It's trying times, folks. I will tell you that straight up. It's trying times. But as we talked about earlier in this show, the speed that they use, the scientists, the doctors, of getting us a vaccine was unbelievable. I don't know. I'm not a history buff. Has any other vaccine in this world for a pandemic like this been solved this fast?
There's nothing even.
Not even close.
Not even close.
Yeah. I mean, there's been other things that have kerflopped before. This is working. I know when you turn on the media, all you see is the bad things. You and I had this story before we came in. The first week, it was like 750,000 were vaccinated in the United States. The media covered 2 Alaskans that had, 2 up in Alaska rather, that had allergy reactions to it, and 1 fainting nurse in Tennessee. And that's all that was on the media that whole week. What happened to the other 749,997?
Yeah, we just have to stay the course on that. You and I talked about this a little bit, is that it doesn't matter what the medication is, or even if you just eat something off the grocery grocery store shelf, if you make every American do that
Yeah.
at large numbers, there are going to be allergic reactions. There's going to be negative results, but those numbers will be incredibly small. And the overall good that these vaccinations have done for humanity is I just couldn't imagine still living with the fear of polio.
Right.
And that's exactly where we would be without a vaccination. And so it can be a little scary. You can be a little bit uncertain, but talk to the person you need to trust, and that's your doctor.
All right, we're going to end it with that. And again, try Knoxville.com back for season 2. Next week, our guest is going to be Knoxville Police Chief Aaron Fuller. We're going to talk about his first 6 months as chief at Knoxville. Kevin, thank you again for coming in. We'll see everybody next time.